Welcome to the TIAC Talk series. These are short and snappy talks on a variety of topics and issues that TIAC is addressing through its advocacy initiatives on an ongoing basis. Each talk is designed to be practical and informative. By the end, you'll know what concrete actions you can take today to make a difference tomorrow. You'll hear success stories about organizations that are doing things right and how to keep the conversation going after the event. Vous entendrez dans les causeries sous peu des histoires de réussite concernant des organisations qui ont pris des bonnes décisions et sur la façon de poursuivre la conversation après l'événement. Au Canada, le secteur du tourisme emploie une personne sur 10. Nous pouvons contribuer au changement. Our tourism sector employs 1 in 10 Canadians. We can make a difference. So let's get these talks started.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're having a great Congress, and thank you so much for attending this session. Not to take anything away from the other exceptional sessions that are happening right now, but this one truly does have the potential of changing your mind, preconceptions, and perhaps even going so far as to saving the life of someone or other lives. It does have that potential, and not even to be hyperbolic about it, but it's remarkable what I've learned in the last little while. Keep in mind that I'm essentially a novice at this, but a little bit about the journey that I've had in this short time, I think maybe might be impactful to some of the folks watching today. The goal today in 13 short minutes is to give you some facts and some basic concepts that you can take away and introduce into your workplace, your home, your social circles, or bubbles as we call them now, anywhere that you feel that this information could make a difference. And this isn't an easy subject. There are facets to this that are extremely difficult to hear about and to deal with. And in some cases, it's absolutely heart-wrenching. But this must be talked about. And the one thing that I can promise you is that after today, and if you decide to get further into it, that you will be affected by it. It's impossible not to be affected by it. And then hopefully it'll inspire others to maybe take some action in whatever way that looks like for yourself or for people that you interact with. For me, this really started about a year ago, and I was attending a Hotel Association of Canada board meeting, and my Ontario colleague, Tony Elenis from ORMA, spoke about a conference that he had attended in the States around human trafficking. And he was obviously deeply impacted by what he had learned. And if there's one thing I've learned is that if Tony suggests that you look into something, will you do it? And so I did. I came back to Saskatchewan, and I had an initial meeting. It was a 2-hour meeting with our provincial RCMP, a couple of constables, as well as 2 from Regina and from Saskatoon, the municipal city police forces. And I have to admit that I was left shaken by what it is that I learned. Just absolutely jaw-dropping. I can't even explain how I felt. And I struggled for a couple days. It's impossible not to be affected by what you hear, because this is stuff that I learned was happening, to young ladies, girls that were my own daughter's ages, and right from neighborhoods that were like mine. This was really in our backyards. It was truly remarkable. I've been in hotels since 1983, and I was really shocked by what I learned. And I think a little bit embarrassed, certainly guilty, because I just had no idea what I was missing. I had these 3 decades, and I just can't believe how much I would have missed if I only had known. Now, you don't know what you don't know, but that's not an excuse. I think we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. And, and I also can't live in the past. You got to live in the present. And really, how do we make a difference today in the present? So what you'll be seeing from me today is just what I've learned in the last little while, knowing that I have to try to do something. Those conversations, those initial ones, really led to me lots of conversations. It really opened up floodgates. Had a meeting with the executive of the Saskatchewan Associations of Chiefs of Police, who are very interested in what it is that we were talking about. How could industry work with law enforcement to make a change, like to really affect a change in human trafficking? We have a presentation that we'll be doing this year at their annual event. It led to meetings with ministers of justice and other departments, ministries who were all very interested in how it is that we could assist law enforcement as they tried to work with victims, in human trafficking. We're actively engaged right now in putting in a summit that would bring industry and law enforcement and educators and First Nations leaders together develop a provincial strategy. Hopefully, ultimately, work towards having an establishment of a provincial task force that would coordinate all of these efforts in one repository and have a really systematic effort plan forward. And what it really did for me too is led to the creation of a training presentation that we would not just have, we could deliver to general managers and employees, but given in such a way that we could simply give it over to those department heads and general managers, and they could deliver it, because it's not hard, certainly not hard to understand the impact, but certainly easy to deliver. And it's just some small things that could truly make a profound difference. And so when we do talk about what occurred to me in that first 2 hours was really that paradigm shift that occurred in me, but it also is occurring in within law enforcement across Canada, because there's a chasm of difference between what our notion of what prostitution is and what a prostitute is and what is sex trafficking, human trafficking. Prostitution is it's an offer and agreement to engage in a sexual act in exchange for something of value, money or food or shelter, and it's a personal choice. When it comes to sex trafficking, this involves force, deception, and unbelievable manipulation, coercion, of another person into having sex for money. And when coercion happens into sex work, then it becomes trafficking. And a lot of the methods used by pimps it's disturbing because it really preys upon the most fragile minds. Sex workers typically, from what I've learned, they don't need rescuing. The victims of human trafficking do. The level of the coercion manipulation by these predators is as shocking as it is disgusting. Those pimps are masters of manipulation, and they prey on the vulnerabilities and insecurities of impressionable young minds. It's indoctrination and brainwashing. It's unbelievable, the stories that you would hear. And a lot of the times, these girls believe that they're actually in love with their pimps. There's that kind of emotional attachment because it starts at such a young age. And it's really destructive on these young and fragile and always isolated young folks. This is part of the control mechanisms that these pimp uses to keep them utterly isolated from support and family. Part of the process is to start to understand, the difference between myth and fact. Myth is that sex trafficking doesn't happen in our country or neighborhood. Well, it does across Canada and in Saskatchewan. Sex trafficking across every corner of our province, right from currently right now, one small town of 75 has one pimp and 5 or 6 young ladies working in this small little community. And it's unbelievable how transient they are. And again, that's part of the tactics of the pimps, is to be very transient, move from small town to small town to keep the girls isolated. Another myth is that it doesn't involve Canadian girls. Well, it does. 90% of the Canadian of the kids being trafficked are Canadian. And in fact, in Saskatchewan, there's a disproportionate number of the young ladies are First Nations kids. It's devastating on so many levels. It's just, we have to pay attention to this and understand, what it is that we're actually dealing with. The other myth is it's not going to happen to somebody that well, it does. It can happen to anybody. The common denominator of the victims is their vulnerability. Their desire to be noticed, to be popular, to be loved is usually that common thread amongst all of them. The other myth is that it only happens at low-end motels. It happens in every form of accommodation. That's why we take this so seriously. What's our part to play in this, to ending it? It's not just hotels, motels, but also short-term rentals like Airbnb. As we get better in our industry at recognizing, the different signs of human trafficking, and we start to, eradicate it or push it away, worried that it's going to just migrate into other accommodation pieces that might not have the security or the sophistication that we do. So it's ubiquitous and it's pervasive. So ultimately it's about awareness and training. In one of the more disturbing parts that I've learned is that the business case around this, from a pimp's eyes, from an organized crime perspective, it's about the dollars and cents. And 40 million kids were trafficked worldwide last year. 70% are female, 30% are male. And in the United States alone, it was a $354 billion business. That's staggering. And when you think about those dollars and cents, how do you get there? Well, one trafficker with one victim, the revenues generated, and that's how they refer to it, revenues generated from one victim is $250,000 a year and up. You know, one trafficker has a self-described stable of up to 10 victims. You know, organized crime, and this was another part that was extremely disturbing, is that organized crime, some of it is transitioning from drugs to trafficking. And in their mind, and this is repugnant, is that when drugs are used, when you sell somebody drugs and they use it once, and then they have to be resupplied. So you always have to be in constant, getting your supply. And the way it was described is that when it comes to the victim, that commodity could be used over and over and over again, it being a human person. So that's how these people think of their product, of these victims, is purely from an economic perspective. There is no remorse. And those are the parts that are really difficult to hear, particularly the specific stories. So how can we help? You know, from the accommodation perspective, in looking at certainly my work history or being in HR for so long, what would training look like for our front desk staff? That's our front point of contact. You know, you're always looking for persons that pay with cash, check in for several days or a week. You know, an older man or woman who checks in with a younger female. And the female oftentimes apparently can appear to be dazed. They'll stay distant from their companion and certainly avoid eye contact. You know, they'll ask for rooms with a view of a parking lot. And at the end of a hall or away from the main entrance, which makes sense. They want the Johns to be able to have access without being identified or red flagged. You know, persons checking in that appear to have very little or no luggage, or those types of things are really only handled by the handler or by the companion. And keep in mind that the presence of just one of these indicators, it doesn't immediately mean that it's human trafficking, but it's something to pay attention to. You know, from a security perspective, if you have security, you know, keeping an eye out for guests who check into a room and later move others into the room. They check into a room but don't appear to be staying by themselves. Numerous male visitors coming and going from the room. And then, you know, keeping an eye on who might be the potential victims themselves. You know, is there physical or emotional abuse that can be identified? Housekeepers. Now, housekeepers oftentimes have a more intimate view of what's going on inside of rooms. You know, for them to keep their eyes open for rooms that guests are, you know, declining cleaning services for extended periods of time. Constant do not disturb signs on the doors, increased demand for towels and bedding, you know, large quantities of used condoms in the trash, lots of computers, cell phones in the room, and numerous children in the room. Lack of adequate language skills, particularly, you know, for the victims that are newcomers to Canada or not from Canada. Even to our food and beverage outlets, you know, our servers and bartenders getting an education on what to look for. You know, guests requesting information about adult services. That happens. Individuals asking, you know, staff or patrons for food and money. Very anxious behavior and avoiding contact with staff. Them not having, you know, the victims not having any identification or cell phones or money of their own. That's typically just kept right away from them as another measure of control from the pimps. There's a whole host of things to look for with regards to, you know, what your staff can be made aware of and what to look for. So what should staff do if these red flags start going off? You know, internal procedures for all employees would be, if it's suspected, you know, immediately advise manager or duty on manager, general manager about what they're seeing. You know, don't confront the victim or the offender. Record and report all of the behaviors. Make sure that there's some documentation to it. And the manager, you know, security is call 911 if it's considered to be a dangerous and obvious situation. The other thing to do, which is important, would be to call the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline. And it's a fantastic resource. And anybody can call this. If you're unsure about what you're seeing and you want to talk to somebody about it, the number we'll talk about again is 1-833-900-4600. 1010. Now, these folks have resources for victims and for staff. It's a remarkable organization and certainly at the ready at any time. And if it does come down to calling police, is once the police are on staff, make sure that those detailed reports are given to them in a timely fashion right away. And really what's needed then, as we in Saskatchewan try to plow our way forward. Certainly every day is a learning experience. I think one of the things that we really need is not me doing this or industry solely doing this. Law enforcement is doing so much and there's subcommittees set up, but what we really need is government funding for a provincial task force, a group that would be dedicated to this, could start off small, but an agency that coordinates provincial efforts, gathering information and really developing a plan and executing on that, and focusing on data first. This is all rooted in the data. The second thing would be, I think, for the Ministry of Justice and local mayor and councils, talk about legislation and bylaws and laws that could be altered that could assist law enforcement to be able to work with these victims, because that's the biggest challenge is for relationships with these victims to develop a connection. That's the only way to assist these young ladies out of this. For employers and victims, we need the laws to reflect an easier path for victims to be able to report and get the support that they need. And third, the support for the rescued victims. We had 6 young ladies that were assisted in one of our city Swift Current. And it was unbelievable what happened once that happened. Where does the support come from? They'll need lodging for the night or nights. They need food on the table. They need an incredible level of supports. They've been entrenched in organized crime and really, in a mindset that it's incredible. And they're struggling with addictions. There's isolation from friends and families. Psychological support is desperately needed. They even need help with the basics. Keep in mind that many of these kids have been under the strong arm of other folks. So they need food and shelter for sure. But even how do you get a health card, get a phone? How do they pick up prescriptions? They've never done any of this. And for those that were in Swift Current, how did they even get home? Many of them were from other parts of the country. So what about transportation and flights? Who coordinates that? And certainly it would be the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking. They're a huge resource, but someone on the ground, boots on the ground in Saskatchewan that could coordinate that under one auspices would be certainly advantageous. And they really do need somebody to hold their hands through this whole process. It's extremely traumatic. And I think most importantly would be opportunities like this. Keep the conversation going. This has to be something that is talked about. I think I'm running out of time, and understood at every level of business, government, and law enforcement, embedded into every orientation program in the province. And if you can, the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking, Julia Dredick and Ashley Tingley, amazing resources, access to amazing information and resources. And that number again is 1-833-900-1010. There's attachments to this presentation. Please access them. You have my email address, and that's even my phone number. If there's any questions, please get in touch with me or with them at the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline. And I think that is all I have. I'm run right out of breath and would be happy to take any questions at this time. Didn't have a PowerPoint to give anybody, but I can certainly give the training program that we have to those that would want access to it. And again, take our logo off it, take it, alter it to whatever your needs might be. Just get it in front of as many of your staff as you can, and even start talking to your kids and loved ones about this stuff. And that's all I've got. Is there any questions? Let me see if I don't see any questions. Oh, maybe there is. Okay, it doesn't look like there's any questions. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending this. Really appreciate it. Go out there and make a difference.
Thank you for joining us for this TIAC talk. The team at TIAC has worked hard to create a program that delivers ideas, solutions, and tools to help you navigate the pandemic and road to recovery. At TIAC, the focus is on ensuring there is a vibrant and successful visitor economy post-COVID-19, and we can't do it without you. Please visit TIAC's virtual booth to become a member and support their efforts.